This portion of CardioSource Video News is supported by the makers of Xarelto.
Welcome to day 3 of ACC 12. I'm Dr. Randy Martin with CardioSource Video News, and we have a great panel to talk about late-breaking clinical trials. Dr. Peter Block. Peter is professor of medicine and the director of the structural heart program at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta. Deepak Bhatt. Deepak is an associate professor at the Harvard Medical School, associate professor of medicine, I should say, at the Harvard Medical School, and chief of cardiology at the Boston VA, and a good friend of all of us, Dr. Paul Douglas. Paul is the chief of the Division of Cardiology at the Atlanta Medical Center. So thank you all for joining us. So a lot of fun late-breaking clinical trials. Peter, why don't you lead off?
I'll lead off with a sort of an interesting trial. This is a monoclonal antibody trial, and the biology is intriguing. This is an LDL lowering trial. So the biology is this. There is a thing called PCSK9, and PCSK9 regulates LDL receptor expression in cells. And to block it, there is now a monoclonal antibody that has been developed called, and I want to make sure I get it right, REGN727.
Very good.
So REGN727 blocks this receptor expression, and by so doing, theoretically, should lower LDL.
Right.
So the question is it safe and is it efficacious? And it turns out the short version of the answer is yes, and probably yes. It seems significantly lower LDL. What that potentially means is that patients who have LDLs that simply can't be treated well with statins and so forth can now have something in the future that they can look to that may lower them even further. The problem is we don't know about safety completely. One patient had a vasculitis, which is probably related to this monoclonal antibody. It was treated with steroids and it all went away, but this is a small trial. Yeah. One patient still doesn't make a summer, but a little bit worrisome, but a hopeful new kind of therapy for high LDL.
Deepak?
Yeah, I agree with Peter completely. This is a very exciting potential development. PCSK9 is important in LDL receptor recycling, and the natural experiment's already been done. That is, people that have mutations in this particular gene who have very low expressions of LDL seem to have low cardiovascular event rates. So the natural experiment's been done. Whether these results seen in this small safety and efficacy study pan out into reduction of cardiovascular events, highly likely, but it needs to be proved.
You know, the monoclonal antibody business is sort of interesting. We sort of say, oh my God, but the fact is we use them all the time. Apixaban is a monoclonal antibody, as is the digoxin antibody.
Yeah, Paul?
There you go.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, we're on the right track. Hopefully this will help us identify people who are at risk and be able to provide them with additional therapy. And we know that there are going to be side effects associated with it, and we really need to just look out for those things. But identifying these people early should be helpful.
Peter, any final thoughts on this trial?
No, I think it's exciting. We'll just have to wait and see for a larger trial.
Okay, good. Paul, I think you another trial this morning caught your eye.
Yeah, this is the pacemaker therapy for patients with neurally mediated syncope and documented asystole. These are folks that continuously worry all of us that have these fainting spells. And this trial looked at the efficacy of an implanted loop recorder to see if we could identify those people who are at greater risk and see then if they would benefit from having a dual chamber pacemaker inserted. And so they were able to identify patients who were at risk, folks who had syncope with greater than 3 seconds of asystole versus those that had no syncope but had 6 seconds of asystole, putting them at greater risk than they implanted pacemakers. And those two groups turn the pacemaker off in one group, turn it on in the others. And those folks who had the pacemaker on had fewer events. And so small trial, single center trial, but looks like maybe we can do something to help those folks now, you know, and maybe dual chamber pacing is going to be the treatment for them.
Deepak, thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a great trial because these patients are tough to know what to do with, and if you just put a pacemaker on everybody that faints, well, a lot of them don't benefit, and we already know that from prior studies. But what I think the investigators wisely did here was introduce loop recording into the equation and figure out is this patient really at high probability of benefiting from the pacemaker? So it's taught us a couple of things, I think, not just the potential value of pacemakers in these types of patients, but also the value of loop recorders.
Yeah.
Peter?
I'm intrigued by these folks. They're difficult to treat, hard to make a decision about. The problem is not all the patients got better either. Even though they had pacemakers implanted and on, they still had some syncope. So there's still a group of patients that we don't know everything about. But I think this is a good step forward, and the wiseness of the loop recorder, I think, is extraordinary. It was a great trial. We learned a lot.
And you think it's going to impact the way you practice if you see these patients? I mean, you're now going to be looking at, say, we need the loop recorder.
Well, it gives us another tool for strategizing them. You know, we really need to be able to determine who's at real risk.
Right.
You know, this is generally a benign disease. So if we can figure out which patients, in granted, implanting a loop recorder is an invasive procedure, but if it'll help us to really stratify patients in the best way, then I think it will impact the way we practice.
So, you know, so two great studies this morning. I mean, obviously looking at very different spectrums of the cardiovascular disease and treatment, and we're going to have more in just a minute. So we'll stay tuned. We want you to stay tuned. We'll be right back after a short break.